Portable gaming was invented to fill that time gap for when you want to be entertained but can't be in a place or spot that's conducive to that, like commuting or waiting at the doctor's office. Nobody wants to do that. You're just sitting there with nothing to do. Well, this is where the Game Boy came in. And then soon after, the Game Boy Advance. And that really only came out in 2001 for $100. That's pretty exciting because it got you gaming on the go for $100. Using that as perspective, we now have the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, which for $150 in 2023 can do quite a lot. It's very exciting. Let's take a look. So for $150, you get a whole metric Wario of gaming packed into this tiny little Android-based device. There's a ton to cover here, so let's go over to the Workbench and take a look at this thing. They're good for something plain. When the console itself is exciting, you don't need to have anything else. Added my little sticker there. So these are the physical dimensions and features of the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. We're going to start off with a little bit of a tour around the device. It's about this big, to give you perspective for people who haven't seen it in person or are shopping online, which most of us are. This is pretty comparable to something around this size. Game Boy Advanced. Ambernick RG35XX. If this is the Nintendo 3DS XL. This is great for the 4x3 content, where I think this has its own use cases. So, to go around the device and just take a look for a second, the buttons I have replaced myself. They sell a kit to replace the buttons. The joysticks are, in my opinion, pretty small, but for the size of this device, they are perfectly fine. They're easy, responsive, and clicky. The D-pad and buttons are exactly the same way. All the buttons are clicky, nice to press, and exactly what you'd expect from a pocketable device of this era. The top buttons are small, but in no way, shape, or form make them an issue. I think they're nice and clicky for what they are, and no issues there. The Start Select button is up on the top. Mini HDMI. This is the power button. This is the home button. And our volume adjustment on the left side. On the bottom, we have speaker holes, which I do not like whatsoever. Them facing directly down. Most of the sound comes out of this back grill and out the back of the case versus coming at you. So these could just get flipped around or ported differently so that they could come out the right way. That would just be a redesign of these two capsules, because they do take up a lot of space in the right area. They're very close to having that right. They just need to flip it around. This is the D-pad module or the button module that I replaced. And if you notice, a lot of these are in different modules. So under this plate, here's the battery, and then this is where the processor is sitting. I think the screen's very nice. I think the gloss is very nice. I actually have dropped it a few times, not on purpose, but this is in its currently dropped state, and it's been no issues. I think this device physically is very nice, well put together, and I like this one very much. So that's the basic layout of this device. The whole point of this thing is to have gaming on the go for relatively cheap. And I think this does a lot in this category because it provides you with emulation and game streaming, along with actually being a relatively put together device. There is one gripe about the company putting out the Retroid Pocket 3 close to the 3 Plus, but that's something I can't speak on because I didn't buy the first one. I only bought the 3 Plus. So take it for what you will. Let's head back over to the bench to get a look at some of the gaming we can do on this. This is the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus's front end for emulation. As you can see here, we have all of the different systems laid out, and you can go into them and get all of the different games. These don't come preloaded. You will have to have your own library to put onto this device. So these are all the systems that I've played that I really like on this device for how big it is and how well the emulation runs. Pretty much anything handheld from Game Boy Advance and below will play no problem. The PSP emulation on this device works absolutely fantastic. I think this is a great shape device for a PSP emulator. And this is personally what I'm going to be using for my PSP, Nintendo DS, and PlayStation, and some PlayStation 2 ROMs. Now this emulator front end has a little overlay on the side, just like a menu that kind of goes over top of all of this, which is kind of nice because you can, for each one of these emulators, you could take the keys and map them to what you'd like, if they don't work right out of the box. As you can see, some of these emulators run games well, and some don't. This is all dependent on how the backend interacts with the game and how well optimized the game is with the emulation software and the chip that is in the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. Another channel goes through a bunch of these Retroid Pocket emulator setups, and that is who I'd recommend to go get the information from for that, if you're having issues with certain emulators. So a double press of the home button on the side here gets you back to the front end quickly. So I actually found this game from ETA Prime. I missed this when I was a kid, but this game is awesome. And I actually think the art style kind of holds up to some of today's games. So some of these games will play, but some definitely won't. Nintendo DS is actually one of the systems that I'm most excited for on this device. This can do a lot of games, and if you have a pretty large collection of these types of games, it's nice to play them again. And this is great because it runs just very well. Now, other backends that I have used on this don't run as well. I believe this is the paid like $5 one. Nice thing too is with the auto saves or overwrite saves, you can just easily save wherever you are. So if you're right in front of the boss room or something, you can save quickly and then resume quickly, which is nice. So when you go back and say start Pokemon again, you're just right back into it, which it's very quick. This tree don't know nothing. Brand new save, off to the other games. So Nintendo DS absolutely gets a passing grade. So I would say this console's best idea for what it will run is Nintendo DS games. Anything below the Nintendo DS games on Nintendo's lineup will run fine. PSP also gets a passing grade. I think this one does well on this device with a little bit of tinkering. The PlayStation also does well, but it's game dependent, just like the PlayStation 2. Some games will run on the PlayStation 2, but it's not great. PlayStation games, a lot more will run. Some do have issues though. As for the GameCube, I've seen this channel get it to run GameCube games perfectly fine, but I was not able to get GameCube games to run perfectly for mine. There was stuttering and issues with backends and all this other stuff. I don't think this console does very well with the GameCube. It can play some of the games, but it doesn't play them fantastically. I think where this thing shines is the PSP games and Nintendo DS games for console and everything below that. I personally didn't game in those generations, so I'm generally going to stick to Nintendo DS games and PSP games. But that's not all the software that this thing will be playing on it. The combination of the Wi-Fi card and the processor on this device do perfectly fine with streaming games as well. This is actually one of the favorite modes I have for this device right now. There's so much it can do with just emulation, in addition to being able to stream tons of stuff, in addition to like running Netflix, because it's also just an Android device. Game streaming, you can play first-person shooters and different types of games like that on this device, but with the small screen real estate you have here, it's a little bit tough to get through a ton of gaming, because the objects on screen are very small. Things I've been sticking to are third-person shooter games in addition to Lego games and different puzzle games. This screen also looks fantastic for how this runs. So just looking around here, this game runs incredibly well on this device. And honestly, you can't really tell with how small the screen is that you're even streaming this. There's not really any perceptible lag. And it looks great. So the nice part with this too is when you're game streaming like this, it doesn't really eat up much of the battery. Now, full-on gaming, you'll get about 4 hours depending on your load on the CPU here, but the battery's relatively large. It's around the size of the screen, and it's pretty well optimized. So this is the Xbox Game Pass. GeForce Now runs equally as well. I'm running Dorfromantik. This little puzzle game runs absolutely spectacular on this device. And I think with its screen size, too, it makes it a fun little way to kind of just play this game on the go. So yes, you can, if need be, run shooters and Crysis 3 on here. But it's again one of those things that I don't think this is the device for this type of game. It runs pretty well. There's a little bit of dips and a little bit of lag here and there, but you're running Crysis 3 on a phone. Pretty spectacular, though, that this plays at all. So this is the type of game that I think really succeeds on this device, is a game that's a top-down view, third-person view, or any sort of puzzle game that gives you more of a view of what's going on and lets you kind of see what's going on the screen. So game streaming is great on this device. Emulation is also fantastic on this device. With an expandable SD card and replaceable parts, I think this is a great little device. Now that was just some of the gaming that this can do. There's a lot more that this can do, and if you'd like to see any sort of setup videos for this, Retro Gamecore does a fantastic job of diving into the settings and setting it up on the back end, which I use to set mine up, but this is more of a full overview of the device and if it's worth the money. Bringing us to money. Yeah! So, for $150, is this device worth it? If you're getting this device solely to play anything Game Boy Advanced or PS1 and below, something that's not going to use joysticks, I don't think this is the device for you. You can go and get an Ambernick device for around $50. But if you're looking for a device that isn't your phone for game streaming, in addition to emulating stuff like the Nintendo DS and the PSP, for $150, this is the ticket. So, the standout feature for me of this device is that it's basically a mini Steam Deck. It's not running on the same Linux, but it's running on Android, which opens up all of the Android emulation. This also opens it up to game streaming. So if you want something very small that's going to be able to stream games and also fit in your pocket, but also not break the bank, I think this is a decent option for this category, because it's kind of slating itself right in the middle, where it's not as expensive as a Steam Deck or a gaming laptop or something that's going to do a lot more on its own power, It's basically like, hey, I'm this tiny little thing that will play games, but not break the bank. Because for $150, I mean, that's like 2 AAA titles nowadays, right? It's like $70 a title. So I think the cost comparison of if you're buying this to do some emulation, and hey, it also game streams on the side, not bad. But like I said before, if your budget is lighter than $150, something like the Ambernick device would be good for you. If your budget's a little bit higher than $150, check out the Steam Deck, because that is by far one of my favorite gadgets to come out in recent years. And neither come with pickles. So please, tell me where I can get them. Nobody knows!